Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we had a fantastic conversation with Natalie Hayden. Natalie is living with Crohn's disease, and you probably know her from her blog, Lights, Camera, Crohn's. We talked to her about what it was like to have Crohn's disease and being an on-air reporter and host of Wake Up Wisconsin. We talked to her about how she started her blog. We talked to her about motherhood and raising 3 small children while having Crohn's disease. And we talked to her about what it's like to work as a patient advocate and some tips that she has for others who may be interested in starting to do this as well. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. Cheers.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey, guys. This is Alicia, and we are very, very excited to be joined by Natalie Hayden. Natalie, you are patient blogger and advocate extraordinaire, so welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I am thrilled to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have you, but we're going to start out by asking you the very unprofessional question of what are you drinking?
So I am drinking a white Moscato that I went a little out on a limb because I'm not a big drinker, but I really wanted to celebrate this with you guys tonight. So I poured a little glass. I had to go in my china cabinet to try and find a wine glass for white wine. That's how little I drink. So cheers to tonight.
Cheers. Oh, I love it. Thank you for celebrating with us because we were very excited to have you on. So I definitely was hoping to be drinking. Unfortunately, I'm feeling a little under the weather. So I'm drinking tea today, which is very abnormal for me. So sorry, guys. Delicious tea, though. So celebratory tea. Robin, what about you?
I have a very large bottle of water next to me, but also, and here is my disclaimer, do not come at me. I am drinking a Coke because I needed caffeine and carbonation and hydration. And the J pouch is getting used to the carbonation. So, I like to live on the edge.
I'm curious, though, when you say it's getting used to carbonation, what happened, if you don't mind my asking, what happens when you have carbonation?
Well, I think that Stacy and I, friend of the show, Stacy Collins, and I have talked extensively about the gas and the J pouch. And then you also get, Stacy calls them altitudes. When you fly, also have gas. And so gas when you fly, just gas and junk with a J pouch. And so I'm adding to that gas by drinking carbonation.
So basically it's a bowel moment, as you ladies like to call it.
I'm getting ready for a bowel moment. Yes. I'm prepping.
Yes. I'm sure the people next to you will appreciate it. So
thankfully there's no one next to me since I'm sitting here talking to you about bowel moments.
I meant on the plane, friend.
Oh, yes. That could be a problem.
You'll be fine. They'll be fine. Nobody notices. It's so loud on the airplane anyway, so it's not a big deal.
They'll think someone else did it. I'll start looking around.
Well, Natalie, this isn't about farting on airplanes, so we're going to move on to the next question of what is your IBD connection? What brings you into our community?
Absolutely. So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease 2 months after college graduation on July 23rd, 2005. I graduated from Marquette University in May of that year with aspirations of working in TV news, was perfectly healthy, had never had even an ear infection in my lifetime. And all of a sudden, I started having abdominal pain anytime I ate or drank anything. I had fevers up to 105. I would be driving in the summer months in Chicago, where I'm from, and I would start getting the chills where I would have to turn the heat on and then put the air conditioning on. And I was so weak and fatigued all the time. I was living with my parents trying to find a job, and I couldn't even go up the 13 stairs in their house. And I was somebody who used to work out every single day, avid soccer player from childhood through college. And I didn't know what was going on with me. I mean, it was really scary. And I went to my general internist. First, she thought it was my gallbladder. Then she thought it was my appendix. They did ultrasounds. They kept telling me, everything looks pristine. You look great. And that took about 2 months. And then my mom's a nurse and she came home from work one evening and I still wasn't showered. And that really scared her because I was somebody who, before I had kids, the minute I would wake up, I would shower, be done up, hair and makeup, everything. And I was still in my pajamas and it was dinner time. So she said, Natalie, we're going to the emergency room. This is getting out of hand. This is out of character for you. So we went to the emergency room, and I am one of the few people who was actually diagnosed with Crohn's disease in an emergency room. I was given a rectal exam and a CT scan of my abdomen, and the doctor walked in the room and he said, you're malnourished, you're dehydrated, your hemoglobin's only a 7, you're almost about to need a blood transfusion. and you have Crohn's disease. And in that moment, out of the nearly 18 years of living with Crohn's, I remember almost every single detail. My mom and I have no recollection. I don't know if I cried. I don't know if I stared forward. It was like time stopped and my world came crashing down. And to this day, I really have no idea how I responded. I was in the hospital for over a week and I left on 22 pills a day from going from being a healthy person to having a chronic illness for which there's no cure.
Yeah, it's very momentous, right there. And that's a massive change. So you get all of these 22 pills. Does that help? Does it not? What happens after that? I mean, because that seems, I don't know, Crohn's disease seems like the pills are usually not the thing that really helps it in the end. It's usually having to go onto a biologic that usually is an injection or an infusion. So did it help? What happened?
Yeah. So, once you're diagnosed with a chronic illness, you really have to come to grips with grieving your former self and relearning your identity and what it means to be who you are. I felt like my Crohn's disease was such a scarlet letter. My college boyfriend at the time, who, quote, loved me and wanted to spend the rest of his life with me, never visited me once in the hospital. And while I was in a wheelchair going home to the parking lot, he broke up with me. So in that moment, I'm thinking, I have a chronic illness. I'm no longer a healthy person. Nobody's going to love me. How am I ever going to work in TV news? I'm so unhealthy and I'm so damaged. And I think having that mentality, it just broke me. And then having to take all this medication that changed my appearance. I went from somebody who worked on Marquette TV, 4 nights a week on air, take my picture, put me on video. I want to do all the things. And I wouldn't let anybody take my photo because I was on 60 milligrams of prednisone for 3 months. And my cheeks were enormous. I was breaking out. I had insomnia till 3 a.m. every night, blowing. I remember chewing bubble gum and staring in the mirror across from my bed and just crying and thinking, who am I? Like, what happened to my life? My family was so supportive, but they don't have Crohn's disease. They don't have ulcerative colitis. They can only relate and empathize so much. And when people just constantly look at you with sorrow and sympathy and you're eating and you get up and they all are like, oh no, she's going to the bathroom again. It makes you feel even less than, even though they're trying to be a source of support for you. So I felt like I had nowhere to turn and I was really feeling alone and isolated in that journey because in 2005, nobody was going on Facebook when it just came out, months before and saying, I have a chronic illness, I need support, I need community. So I didn't know anybody that had Crohn's disease aside from my cousin's wife, who was ironically diagnosed the same week as I was. So she lived 30 minutes away from me and we were able to connect. I'll never forget, prior to my diagnosis that week, my mom said, oh my gosh, Natalie, Elisa just got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And I was sitting on the couch and I said, that's what I have too, Mom. Because just by Googling symptoms of what was going on with me, I started wondering if that's what I had. And I think the complexity of the pills, it was, the prednisone and how it makes you feel. It made me feel irritable and angry when I was always such a bubbly and happy person. And then, the Flagyl and just all the Cipro, all the pills that don't make you feel great. So I didn't feel well. And I'll never forget coming down the stairs every morning, my mom would lay out the 22 pills on a paper towel and they'd be timed out throughout the day. Take the Prilosec 30 minutes before you eat. My whole life was run by these pills. And at that time, they weren't initiating treatment of biologic. It was basically a step-up therapy situation where you had to fail drugs. And at the time, there were only 2 biologics on the market for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So I was kept on 6 mesalamine a day for 3 years, which sustained me. I stayed out of the hospital once I was off the prednisone and everything. And I still had a lot of symptoms though, and it was rough. I'd be at work. I ended up going after my TV dream, which is something that when I look back now, I'm so proud of because in October of that year, so less than 3 months after my diagnosis, I kept looking for TV jobs and I landed a job in Minnesota and I moved 8 hours away from all family and friends. And I said, I'm going after my dream. I don't care that I'm on 22 pills a day. I'm doing this. And I started on working as a producer instead of an on-air person because, my appearance had changed quite a bit. So I had gained weight and my cheeks were large. And I just kept telling myself, once I get back to who I was, I'm going to get on air. And I worked as a producer for 10 months. And then there was an opening and I kept saying, I want to do medical reporting at Mayo Clinic. I was in that market and I went after it. I got the job. And 3 months later, I got a call from a station in Wisconsin. They said, we want you as the anchor of Wake Up Wisconsin. So I didn't even look for a job, interview for a job. My life changed in a matter of days. And I went on to anchor Wake Up Wisconsin for 3 years. And during that time, I had several hospitalizations. I had a hospitalization for an abscess the size of a tennis ball in my small intestine. And that was July 2008. And in that hospitalization, it was 4th of July weekend. I can still picture lying in the hospital bed, looking out the window, seeing the fireworks reflecting off the window with my mom, and being told, you are going to need to start either an injection or infusion. Your life is going to change. You need to decide what works best for you. And I was a morning anchor, and I didn't want people to see me in an infusion center. And I didn't want anybody to know about my illness. I was very quiet about it. So I initially said, there's no way I'm doing an infusion. I'm horrible with IVs. That hospitalization in particular still brings up PTSD for me. It took 8 tries to get an IV, and it took 3 nurses, rapid response nurse. They finally had to bring an anesthesiologist. It was so traumatic that to this day, I still have issues with IVs. And I said, there's no way I can do an infusion. I mean, I'm not going through this every few weeks. So I said, I'll do the injection. So I started on the injection. Unfortunately, the loading dose made me so sick. I missed a couple more weeks of anchoring the show. So here I am, when you watch the morning news and the anchor that you're used to watching is gone for weeks at a time, people are asking questions. And when I would return back and being on prednisone and everything, people were asking questions. At this point, I'm 25 years old, and they're saying, is she pregnant? What's she doing? And I'm a single girl. It was just managing being in the spotlight and then fighting Crohn's, and nobody knew what I was dealing with except the people in the newsroom, and they were all protecting my privacy. But they knew, Natalie's not well. She's in Chicago at the emergency room. She's hospitalized in Chicago. I got hospitalized in my TV market with another flare-up, and I was producing the news alone in the newsroom. And all of a sudden I started vomiting. I had a bowel obstruction, and nobody was there with me. And my anchor at the time, my co-anchor, she had to drive me to the ER. My parents were 4 hours away. This is at 1 a.m. because the show started at 5. My parents drove in pitch black darkness up the roads from Chicago to Wisconsin, and they sent me home from the ER. And that day I had to go back to the hospital. And I was so sick at that point. My dad, I was, 26. He carried me over the threshold of the hospital doors like a groom carries his bride. I was so sick. And, just doing this over and over again while working in TV news was such a challenge because I'm anchoring, 4 hours a morning. So say my stomach's bothering me, or I feel like I have to run to the bathroom, or I'm just not feeling energetic enough. I couldn't drink coffee because that would make me symptomatic. So I'm drinking water. I'm getting up at 2 a.m. My dietary schedule's all messed up because when you are a morning news anchor, you eat lunch, at 9 a.m. So that all was a challenge, but I loved working in news so much. I think it was a great deterrent, and it also was a great distraction and motivator for me to be strong and not allow my disease to rob me of my dream. So one of the big pillars in my advocacy work is especially showing pediatric patients and their parents all that's possible despite your disease. Just because you have a chronic illness doesn't mean you can't follow your aspirations wherever you want them to take you. And TV news is a tough business. It's competitive. It's cutthroat. It's, you're working holidays, you're working crazy hours. It's unusual, but it's also an amazing family of support. Everybody in the newsroom and every market I worked in was so supportive and understanding of my IBD. And when I left the news desk finally in November 2014, I said, now is my time to start sharing my story. Now is the time where I can use my love of storytelling and be the voice I so desperately needed to hear upon diagnosis. So when I left the news desk, I finally felt safe to say, look, I'm not just Natalie Spracio, which was my maiden name, said, I'm Natalie Spracio. I have Crohn's disease. I'm not scared of it anymore. I see this more as a badge of honor than a scarlet letter. And I want to show people all that's possible. You can find love. You can go after your dreams. You can be a mom. You can do whatever your heart desires. It's just going to look differently than maybe you had mapped out before. Maybe you previously thought, oh, and then there's a detour, then there's a pit stop along the way, but don't allow it to destroy your life and blow everything up. Because I've always kind of had the mentality, if we all in the IBD community laid on the couch anytime we didn't feel well and said, woe is me, my life is terrible, chronic illness is awful, none of us would do anything with our lives. We'd literally be on the couch almost every day of our lives because there's a constant inner conversation, even when you have remission or when you're in a flaring state. Every single decision is a touch point of your day. And if you maybe drink a cup of coffee and then that triggers symptoms, it throws off the whole day. If you eat cantaloupe, and then maybe you think, oh, I thought it was a safe food, but I should have had watermelon at that board meeting. All of a sudden my stomach exploded. Now I got to undo my pants in a boardroom with a bunch of guys. That's happened to me in corporate America. And, every single decision matters, and it gets stressful and exhausting because the people in our lives don't realize. They just think, oh, they look healthy. They haven't been in the hospital in a while. They're doing great. They're in remission. They don't get to see us do our injections or our infusions or take our supplements at night or, hold our stomachs in agony when people aren't looking. So it's a lot of inner battle and inner struggle. But with the time, now that it's been nearly 18 years, I really wouldn't trade what I've gone through or this diagnosis or this journey, because it has completely shaped my life in such a unique way and just transformed how I take on each day in my life, how I'm a mom, how I did my career, how I've done everything, how I found my husband. So I think that it's a transformation, because I went from, dreading life when I was diagnosed and thinking, this is the worst possible thing. Why me? So depressed all the time, to being empowered by it. And I think it's all a perspective thing.
It's 100% true. I felt exactly the way that you just described before my surgery in 2020, where I was like, I would not be the person that I am. I still know that I would not be the person that I am without my IBD, but having a recent traumatic experience, don't worry, everyone, I'm in therapy, it has shifted that a little bit. I'm not as passionate about like, oh, this disease has made me who I am, because I'm kind of angry at my body right now, like seriously angry at my body right now for trying to kill me yet again. And so I can't wait to get back to where you are, just being so passionate about that opinion and really owning it like a badge of honor. When I hear you talk, it just makes me feel like I can get back there again.
I'm so glad. And, I do want to say we all have our low moments. I know with my advocacy work and what I share on social media and my blog, I'm always transparent, but I'm always positive. But I have my low times too. I was in the emergency room 4 days ago and I had horrific abdominal pain to the point where I didn't know if it was my Crohn's or a stomach bug. I thought I had C. diff, and it was a 4-hour wait in the emergency room. I was being wheeled in a wheelchair by my husband back and forth to the bathroom in front of people, going, nonstop diarrhea publicly, hunched over in pain. And the nurses actually yelled at me in triage and stuck their badge in my face and were saying how other people had it worse and all. I've never been treated so horrifically in my life. I was hysterical and I screamed, I am not a wimp. I have Crohn's disease. And I got so emotional. I went off the deep end. I said, people in the waiting room right now do not have a bowel obstruction. I've had about 10 of them. Everybody's watching TV comfortably. I can't even move. Like, how can you say these things to me? I mean, it was unbelievable. The lack of respect, the lack of empathy that some of these nurses and doctors have for IBD patients. And then they take me to a CT out of the middle of nowhere in the waiting room. I'm sitting there with my husband hunched over with heating pads for 4 hours. And this guy just comes with a wheelchair. He says, okay, you're going to do a CT now. I said, right out of the waiting room? And he said, yeah. Well, he wheels me in and I start crying, because when we get wheeled to a CT, to a colonoscopy, I don't care how long you've been in remission. I get past trauma where I start thinking, what are they going to find? I'm going to get admitted. I'm going to need surgery. I don't want to go through this. And I start getting emotional. And the person that's probably with me is thinking, what is this girl's deal? I mean, this is just a CT. She thinks she has C. diff. This isn't even a Crohn's thing, but we got to make sure. But it's that moment when they push you in the room for the CT. You've done it before. You know what happens. You know what the next step is. How rare is it to go to an ER and actually be sent home that same night? It's only happened to me maybe 2 times. So I went through that. I got emotional. Then they pushed me back in the room, and the doctor on staff in the ER had seen my anastomosis from my bowel resection surgery on the scan. And he walked in all cocky. I looked up, he had just graduated from med school 4 years ago. So he's pretty young, looked like, like a Dr. McDreamy situation here. And he said, so I see you have an ileostomy. I said, no, I don't have an ostomy. And then he said, oh no, you had a reversal. I said, no, I have Crohn's disease. So then I said, no, I had bowel resection surgery. So just getting that questioning while you're in horrible pain and seeing that the person that's taking care of you does not even understand your disease and the complexity of it put me over the edge. And then I look in the doctor's notes today on my portal, and the doctors wrote that I was very anxious. And it just upset me that, everything I was going through, and like, that's what they write about my personality, when I thought, I was treated horribly. And I go through these moments where I feel so empowered and so strong. And then while they're putting the IV on in triage, I just start sobbing, because it's just such an emotional roller coaster with IBD, because it means more than they realize what's happening. Like, we have gone through these traumas so many times, and it's never a good ending. It's always, actually we see stricturing, we see a bowel obstruction. There's an abscess in there. Oh, we didn't see that. And I come to find out today after going to clinic with my GI that while they did the abdominal CT, I'm getting over bronchitis. I have something called tree and bud in my lungs, which I didn't even know existed, which can happen after bronchitis. So that is very serious. And I have to get a chest x-ray now in 2 months to make sure it doesn't become a fungal infection or something serious. So, we are constantly given this new information. I was told in December I had osteoporosis at age 39 and now I have to see a bone health doctor. And it's just constantly adding to it. And it's like, we can wear this badge and we keep feeling strong in some moments, but I can promise you, I have my moments too, where I feel less than, where I am sobbing, where I'm fighting this with so much grit and grinding my teeth, and just really, really struggling. But I just try to stay positive because I look at my 3 kids and I just say, I got to be strong for them. They are my motivation 24/7. And I don't ever want them to see me really, really low, which is hard at times to kind of put on that mask that we sometimes put on when we smile when we're in pain.
Gosh, I am so sorry that was your experience in the emergency room. It's so demoralizing to hear that because you would assume that you come in and you have something like Crohn's disease and every medical staff person there would know that it's not just this occasion, it's this huge history of all of these other experiences that you had. That's so disappointing. It's so disappointing and so infuriating, frankly, too.
Yeah, the nurse said, well, not everybody acts like you in the waiting room. She said, I actually had a woman die in the waiting room with a pulmonary embolism and she was silent, but you have to cry and moan and make all this ruckus and noise. That's how I was treated.
That's not something to brag about.
Exactly.
I don't feel like I had somebody die better than you. That's awesome. Well, and we're reading this book called Doing Harm. It's by Maya Dusenberry, who is a woman who was diagnosed with lupus after I think like 7 years of the same kind of, and yeah, it's a lot about the medical system and how women are mistreated and how often anxiety is the cause and how many times emotions are noted in women's medical charts. And so it just definitely, when you said that, I was like, of course they're going to say it. She's very anxious. Wouldn't you be anxious too if you're in horrible pain and you're getting CT scans and everybody's treating you like shit? Yeah, you're going to be anxious. You're going to be angry and that should be okay. That's so frustrating.
Yes, it's so fresh. I'm still a bit fired up, so I apologize.
No, you be fired up. We get real fired up on this podcast.
We get fired up on this. Yes.
Mm-hmm,
yes.
Pretty regular basis. I'm pretty sure we've upset some insurance companies mainly and they don't listen. So it's fine. So I am curious because you went from being very private with it and in a very public job to then leaving your very public job and then being very public about your disease. That's a big transition. How did you decide to start being so open? What was your first step into that? And talk to us a little bit about having your blog and the response you've gotten from it.
Absolutely. So in 2014, when I left TV, I started working as an internal communication specialist at a natural gas utility. So completely different space, different job, 9 to 5, corporate America. Not my favorite cup of tea, let me tell you. Literally, I know you're drinking tea right now. It was not my favorite, but I made some great friendships there. And unfortunately, while I worked there, I had 3 bowel obstructions in 15 months. And each time I was sick, I was out for a long time, but they were so supportive and just really rallied around me. And in that time, I started doing a couple guest blogs on some of my friends' blogs who didn't even have IBD. They do, infant loss and different things, but they wanted to share a different voice. And I just started doing more with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. So I was the walk hero for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation in 2014, 2015. And I started just being more present at volunteer type events for the foundation and things like that. Well, when I had my 3rd bowel obstruction, it was July. July is my bad month, my diagnosis month. And that's when I started my biologic. And that's also when I was told I needed bowel resection surgery. So when I was told that, I had my surgery August 1st, 2015, and I was 2 months engaged, planning a wedding. And I laid in the hospital bed and I told myself, all right, I need to do something. I need to start sharing my story on a bigger level. I've never blogged before. I have no idea what this entails. I don't even know what WordPress is. I don't even know how to come up with content. I don't even know what people want to hear. I didn't even have any Instagram posts, nothing about Crohn's. So I told myself on that August 1st day, I said, when my diagnosis anniversary comes up, July 23rd, 2016, 1 month after my wedding, I am going to launch a blog and I'm going to make a difference. And through that upcoming year, I started socializing names for a blog. It started with 20 25 different names. I emailed about 100 family members and friends. I made people vote. It went from 5 to 4 to 3. And I kept thinking, how can I do a play on words? And I came up with lights, camera, Crohn's, an unobstructed view. Lights, camera, Crohn's, of course, being my TV background, and unobstructed view, which is kind of not talked about very much anymore. It's kind of just become lights, camera, Crohn's to most people when they talk about it, which is fine. But an unobstructed view was because of my bowel obstruction history, and also because I wanted it to be a play on words that it's a transparent, open look at life with IBD, but I also wanted to put a positive spin on things. Everything that I saw out there in the advocacy world in 2015 was very negative sounding to me, very depressing, and I didn't want to be that type of advocate. So I wanted to be transparent and honest and also show the dark moments, but I wanted to put a spin on things that I hadn't quite seen yet. So I started building an editorial calendar, and this is where my journalism really came in. And I vowed that every Monday, which was a high promise, I was going to share fresh content on my blog. So when my blog came out, I had several weeks of content already thought up in my head. Each Monday I had written out, and just a Gmail, I still do it the same way. I do it in my Gmail drafts, and I write out for the next 6 months, the dates each Monday. And I put in story ideas and who I'm going to feature and what I'm going to do. And I just started sharing content. And ironically, the blog went live on July 23rd, 2016. I found out I was pregnant 2 days later. So it was a lot to take on because I had never been pregnant before. And it really transformed how my blog was going to go because I didn't know any IBD moms. I had never, of course, been pregnant. And so I was able to walk with everybody through that situation and show them, this is how I'm navigating this. This is how I work with maternal fetal medicine. This is my decision for staying on my medicine. This is my decision for not breastfeeding. And then with my third child, I exclusively breastfed. So I completely came full circle on that. When it came to staying on my medicine, breastfeeding my children, everything had transformed through the years. So if people were to look at my old articles or Google breastfeeding, they might see why I'm not breastfeeding as a Crohn's mom. And then my third baby, who's now almost 20 months, I breastfed him exclusively for 14 months. So I just finished breastfeeding in September. So I was able to share kind of both views on that. My middle child, my daughter, Sophia, I breastfed her 6 months and then my milk ran out. So each of my children was fed completely differently. So I've been able to really connect with a lot of IBD moms on that because I'm always of the mindset fed is best. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Breastfeeding is a labor of love, in my opinion. It is very challenging, especially with a chronic illness. It's a lot of onus on the woman. When your body, you don't know how it's going to respond each day, and they're literally sucking the life out of you and taking any nutrients that you even have. So it was a lot. It's a huge commitment. And I credit anybody who does either way because your baby's going to thrive regardless. My kids are all the same when it comes to their health. And I always hear a funny quote from people, and I tell a lot of IBD moms this, that at the end of the day, they're all going to go in elementary school and they're going to eat McDonald's French fries off the floor of the van. So who really cares how they were fed?
That's so true. And I'm sure it was such a great resource for people who are attempting to get pregnant or, attempting to become moms, because I know that's such a big decision in general, even without a chronic illness. And it's so fraught with peril and so many other people's opinions, opinions. So I'm sure having somebody that they could kind of point to say, okay, I at least have a resource that I can go to get an idea of how I should respond to stuff. I'm sure that was so incredibly comforting.
Yeah, it's been such a journey because my blog has been live now since almost 7 years. And just this past summer, I never missed a Monday in over 6 years. And I'm so proud of that because you look at any blog and there's not many bloggers out there who blog weekly, especially in the IBD space. And I shared with the community, I said, look, I'm a mom of 3. This is kind of getting to be a lot on me doing weekly articles. I am going to do my best to share weekly articles, but I just want to tell you, my promise is it's not going to be weekly anymore, but I'm going to try my best. And it was hard to kind of give up that, ability to say, I've never missed a Monday. I love sharing content every week, but it's really taken a lot of the pressure off my shoulders because when I do a story, I really like doing a lot of research and really getting to the bottom of things and doing more investigative reporting. And I have often shared other people's voices because my voice is just one voice in the IBD community. There are thousands, there are millions of people who have amazing stories to share. And I want everybody to feel seen, no matter who they are. If they're a man, there's not many men in the IBD community who share their stories. So I like to get as much of the male perspective because there's a lot of IBD dads out there too that don't feel seen in their journeys and they're going through stuff too. And I like people of all colors, races, you name it. I like to make sure everybody sees themselves through my work. So I'm often looking at things on social media and I get story ideas that way. I'll see a post I'll see somebody talk about something and I'll say, that's going to resonate with the community right now. So my article coming up is about C. diff. And even though I tested negative, I share what I went through personally because I wasn't an antibiotic. My GI is concerned. The whole ER story is laid out in there. And then I received hundreds of DMs from people in the community who have had C. diff. So I do what's called patient experience articles, which are very in-depth. They take me over 20 hours. And I share all the feedback that I received on Instagram. And I just hope that if somebody's out there and they're just diagnosed with C. diff and they're lying in that hospital bed sobbing, wondering, what does this mean for me? How am I going to get this out of my body? They can go to Lights, Camera, Crohn's and say, all right, this is what people did. Vancomycin worked for them. Oh, Flagyl worked for this person. I'm going to take this probiotic because this article is real patient experience. And that's what I want people to see. And I love that so many gastroenterologists and researchers out there are really amplifying the voice of advocates, not just me, but so many others, and utilizing the work that we are doing and saying, this is credible information. And these aren't medical professionals. These are people who live your reality and understand what you're scared of. The patient experience, I've done multiple biologics. So I've tried to do almost every biologic and I share the good, bad, and the ugly. So people can say, oh, I'm getting put on Stelara. What do you think, Natalie? And I say, I have an article on that for you. So I try to be a resource and those articles take a lot of time, but I'm always looking for story ideas. And it really just pumps me up on a Monday morning when I know I have a good story and I know that people are going to say, oh my gosh, I needed this in this moment. I did a mental health piece a couple of weeks ago and it really, really went over well in the community. And it's just sad that so many people feel so isolated and alone. And this makes them feel not so alone. So that is really the goal in each of my stories. I try to tell people with their advocacy work, when you are writing a blog, when you're doing an Instagram post, try not to make it all about you. Let the community see themselves through your writing. And that's how I try to write all of my stories. So if you go on Lights, Camera, Crohn's, you might see me say a sentence about, I experienced this, and then I play it out. I speak to you. Imagine this happening to you. You went through this. So people don't drown it out because we've all been there. We want to read an article, we want to listen to a podcast, and then it's just blah, blah, then they came in the hospital room. Okay, we understand. I'm so sorry you went through that. But honestly, nobody really cares that I went through that. They want to see what this means for them. So ultimately, when you're advocating, I think that people need to kind of change the way that they write stories a little bit and the way they post on social media and let people see themselves through what you have to say.
Yeah. No, I like that the way you introduce it is a little bit like, this is why this has come up, but you very quickly turn it into much more informational. And like you said, so that people can really see themselves. I think it's obviously you're a journalist when I read your stuff, it's pretty clear. Let's talk pregnancy because you mentioned becoming a mom. And I know you were a participant in the piano study. And this has come up for a couple other people too. And one of our docs talked about it. And the piano study is a longitudinal study of women who got pregnant and were taking biologics. So talk about your experience on that and sort of how that's evolved because you've continued on with it. So that's very cool.
Yeah. So the piano study is one of many resource studies for women who have IBD and are pregnant or family planning. And I think that there is nothing better you can do, more empowering than actually participating in a research study, whether it's for pregnancy or just for Crohn's in general. I love promoting studies because we need more research. We need more answers. And it just does amazing things for just your psyche. If you think, I'm sharing my story and I'm going to pave the way for the little girl that just got diagnosed today, for the boy who's in 6th grade wondering what his future holds, for the little girl who wants to be a mom someday and she doesn't know if her medicine will allow her to. So we are making huge strides, but it's only possible with patient participation. So with all 3 of my kids, I participated in pregnancy studies. With my first 2, I did mother to baby studies, which is a great organization as well. And they each look at different things. So with mother to baby, it looked at Humira in pregnancy for my oldest, and he is a kindergartner and I'm still waiting on the results, but in November, so he was 5 years old, we did a follow-up in-person study. They're based in California and I live in St. Louis. And we had 2 researchers interviewing him and they're following him until now. So, it's unbelievable to see. And I'm waiting on the results about the intellectual capabilities and what this, shows in children long-term. And they even had a doctor, it was the week before the pandemic hit, so 3 years ago, come to my home and he checked my 2 oldest children all over their bodies in front of me to see if there's any anomalies that happened. And, looking at to see if there's an extra hair swirl on their head. Every little detail. And it was just so comforting to say, look, they were both exposed in utero, Reed till 39 weeks, Sophia till 37 weeks, to Humira. And look, they're pictures of health. So I love contributing to that. So with my third, I was more in tune with advocacy work at that point. It was 2020 when I got pregnant, and I knew about the piano study. And I said, oh, I want to be a part of this one. This is a biggie. This is to show how biologics and different medications impact babies in utero and in breast milk and everything. So it was a lot at the moment he was born, because you're thinking, you're finding out how much of the biologic is in your newborn baby the moment they come out of the C-section. So they sent me the results and I didn't have any parameters of what they meant. It just made me upset, thinking like, I have no idea what like 12.2 or I don't know the exact number, but it was just a number. And when you don't have, a range of what that means, it shook me up a little bit in the hospital bed, just knowing, it was a whole process of getting his blood, getting my blood, because they had to take the umbilical cord blood. And my husband had to run it to a FedEx in a certain amount of time. And the nurses are packaging it in dry ice. And I'm, fresh out of a C-section. And, we did all the things to make this possible. And then when the results come in, you're just thinking, what does this mean? And I immediately, when I got the results, I emailed the doctors and they were so amazing. They said, we're going to change the way we do things because of your response. So now when mothers receive this, they receive a detailed explanation of what this means because of my response saying, this really scared me because I know that it was going to be in his blood, but this kind of scared me a little bit, and it just changed the future of the study in that way. So that was really rewarding. And they are doing so much now that's different than when I was part of it. So back when I was part of it, you would get phone calls and do surveys online or even through the mail. Now they have a website, they have social media. People actually go into the website and enter their stats. It's completely intuitive and amazing, and so much more access to women around the United States. And they're really trying to change what this means for the future of pregnancy and IBD. And it's so amazing. I'm one of two patients. Jessica is a chronically Jess online, is also doing the advocacy work for it. And so is IBD Moms, who I'm really close with as well, Brooke and Amber. And it's just such a great study. And when I went to see my GI today, actually, one of the fellow GIs in the office said, I was on the computer looking up information on piano, and Natalie, I saw you on there. And I said, oh yeah, I do a lot of work with that actually. So it was just rewarding to have her say that to me today, that, doctors are recognizing the importance of this and that they're sharing that in St. Louis with the mothers here.
That's really cool. Is the piano study going to continue, or what's kind of the next? So they're just going to keep following. Oh, interesting.
Yes, we got extra funding through the Hemsley Trust and some different organizations. So it is going to go on for several years. I don't know off the top of my head, but it is going to be a prolonged study. And nobody is following my baby Connor anymore right now. That kind of just stopped once he was born. But it's such a great study for people that are pregnant, that are newly pregnant, planning to be pregnant. Just be aware of it and look it up. And I think you'll be amazed at the findings they've been able to show about the safety and efficacy of being on a biologic, of being on medication while you're pregnant, and breastfeeding while on it. And it's that gold standard of information where you can say, there's so much gray area, and this takes out so much of the gray area. You can confidently know that by staying on your injection, by staying on your infusion, you are not harming your baby, because it is difficult. Even though I knew it was the best thing for me and a safe, thing to do, it's hard when you are 35 weeks pregnant and your baby's kicking up a storm and you're sitting on the couch about to do an injection, your belly's in the way and you're uncomfortable and you're thinking, I am injecting a biologic into my leg and there is a life inside of me and I feel her, and it would still make me emotional, but I kept telling myself I'm doing the best thing. I don't want to have a postpartum flare. And that's what I tell so many moms. Yep. It is one thing to flare before you're a mom or while you're pregnant. It's another thing to flare when you have a family at home and you don't want to leave that newborn and you can't take care of yourself. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your child. So it's imperative that women trust their care team and understand that it is safe and effective to stay on medication and control and manage your disease. It's the best thing you can do for yourself and your family.
Well, I just think about the fact that, when you're in a flare, you become so malnourished because you're not intaking all those calories and you need extra calories during that time. So even just, staying healthy enough to really make sure that your baby has the best chance possible just seems like a good idea. But I'm also not a doctor, so I say that.
Same here.
I want to reiterate the making sure that you are healthy postpartum, because I ended up in the hospital. My youngest daughter, who is 23 now, about to be 24, we celebrated her first birthday in the family visiting room at the hospital because I had been admitted, and she took her first steps in that family visiting room.
That's a lot.
Because
wow.
I was in the hospital for 21 days. So yeah, you definitely can't take care of your babies if you are not well.
It's a heartbreaking thing as a mom to have to leave your family and not know when you go to the ER when you're going to come home. And what do you even tell them? When I left this past week, I said, I'm hoping to be home when you guys wake up in the morning. And luckily I got home at 1:30 in the morning. But when you are stuck there for 21 days, I mean, that was always my biggest fear. And before I had my oldest, I said, my goal is hopefully to stay out of the hospital till he can walk. And then he started walking. And that was my goal with each child. And my kids were late walkers. They didn't walk till 16 months, all three of them. But luckily I haven't been hospitalized only one night. And it was because of acute gastroenteritis from my oldest son in 2019. But luckily that was just a non-Crohn's immune compromised more situation.
Talk to us about parenting little kids with Crohn's disease, because how do you explain this to them? Because it sounds like you've had times where you've needed to get medical treatment, you've needed to go to the hospital. How do you explain it to them?
It's a very tough conversation because kids are so intuitive and they know and understand more than you give them credit for. So I might think that I'm smiling and acting normal, but they will look at me on a random day and say, Mommy, is your tummy hurting you? And I say, actually, it is kind of hurting me right now. Or if I'm in the bathroom a lot, they'll immediately sit down on their little step stool and look up at me and say, it's okay, Mommy, it's going to go away soon. You're going to be strong. And they are my biggest cheerleaders and my biggest advocates. And I've done several posts on Instagram where my kids have shown me that they know more than I ever give them credit for. And, they watch me and cheer me on, go mama, go, while I do my Humira. And they are the sweetest. And actually watching me do injections has completely desensitized them to their own vaccinations. When we're at the pediatrician's office, when they had their flu shots last year, the nurse was like, wow, your 4-year-old and 2-year-old take this better than like an 11-year-old. I said, well, they see me do injections every other week. And it's almost like they don't even care when they have to get shots because they know what I do. I honestly sometimes fear. My biggest fear is that, of course, I'm going to pass this on to them someday. But what I always tell people that worry about that, if they're considering being a mom or a dad and they're worried about passing it on, is, okay, there's those of us, so many of us, I know I'm the first in my family, where we don't have anybody in our family who understands what it's like to live with IBD. So God forbid that is to happen. There is no greater advocate for your child than you. If God forbid that happens, I'm going to be right there in the ER being able to speak, toe to toe with the doctor about what's going on, what they need, how we're going to manage this, how we're going to treat this. And I will be their biggest supporter and advocate every step of the way. And any mom can do that. You don't have to have IBD to understand it, of course, but a lot of the IBD moms who are caretakers that I speak with, I have several friends around the country who are just remarkable women whose children have, VEO IBD, people whose kids are in kindergarten with a G-tube. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And they come to me and they say, what's my daughter going through? I'm really struggling with this. And they handle it with such grace. And they sometimes, I think they wish that they almost could empathize more and understand, what does this pain feel like? So we almost have a one-up in that regard, that if it is to happen to our children, which is there's such a low risk, don't let that stop you from having children, the small risk of having it passed on. I think that if that were to happen, I would be ready to handle it. It would just break my heart in a million pieces. And it would take a lot of probably therapy and just dealing with it, because honestly, what it means. It's not, I think sometimes being naive and ignorant to what Crohn's and ulcerative colitis means to a person's life can also be bliss in some regards. You might think, oh, that's just going to the bathroom a lot. Well, not quite. It's a lot more than that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but my kids just constantly push me to be stronger, better, to be proactive. I used to, when I was in my 20s and single, I would wait till I was literally crawling on the floor, throwing up everywhere with a bowel obstruction before I would go to the ER. I would do anything but go to the ER. Now, if I'm symptomatic for 2 to 3 days, I'm on that patient portal. Dr. G, hey, I am going to the bathroom 15 times a day. I'm dealing with abdominal pain. All right, Natalie, thanks for letting me know. Let's get you on a burst of prednisone, or let's do an MRE right now. We are so proactive, and we do safety labs every 3 months to see what's going on with my lab work. And I'm seeing so many specialists and, going to the dermatologist, going to the eye doctor, the dentist, every single person, OB, making sure that every test, because you have to be proactive when you're immune compromised and you have IBD, we're just at risk for so many other issues that my kids are a reminder to me me that I have to be here for them. I have to be as well as possible. So it just pushes me to be more proactive. And I wonder of what age when I'll really sit them down and say, I think that my kindergartner's kind of getting the gist of the fact that, mommy's a little different. Mommy might be a little sick sometimes. But my 4-year-old and my 19-month-old, I will say my 19-month-old brought me a blanket this past weekend when I was sick. So, that's how young they start understanding.
They do. The reason that I'm flying cross country, everyone, I don't think that I'm oversharing here, is that my youngest daughter had a colonoscopy. Her colonoscopy was fine, everyone, came back fine, no signs, but both of my daughters have had scopes in the past 2 weeks. But they are proactive too, right? So they go and see the doctors that need to go see if they have symptoms or anything. They're not waiting around in their 20s like I did in my 20s until I couldn't walk anymore. And then I finally go to the doctor. So I feel like we're racing more well-informed and stronger, louder, able to speak up for themselves, consumers, medical consumers. And so I feel pretty good about that.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, that must be so stressful when they go through that for you to worry what's going to be the finding.
It is stressful, but it wasn't as stressful as I thought it was going to be, honestly, Natalie, because I knew that I knew, I was there.
It's emotional. I don't think we realize that in the future, what this is all going to play out for. Your daughters are in their 20s, so you're giving us a sneak peek of what my future is going to be. But when I've spoken with kids young adults, I should say, that age, and their parent has had IBD and they've watched it growing up, the words of inspiration and just adoration for what their parent went through, and they didn't probably realize, we don't realize when we have little ones, what they're actually seeing and what they're thinking. It's really inspiring to hear young adults speak about their parents with IBD.
It is. And my oldest daughter actually volunteered at Camp Oasis. And after she volunteered at Camp Oasis, immediately after, she's, oh my gosh, Mom, I understand even more of what you went through now, because she became friends with all the other counselors. And, a lot of the counselors have IBD at Camp Oasis.
Yeah, that's amazing.
She just came back to me and said, I just understand so much more now, because I didn't share as openly, right, when they were younger, but these other counselors were just sharing so openly. And so it really gave her a better understanding of everything that people with IBD go through.
That's incredible. Good for her.
Natalie, I'm going to take you back to your blog for a second, because you've got me very curious. Having also produced something that we don't necessarily, we kind of put together what we decide we think people will like, and we ask the questions we think people would want to ask. I'm curious if you ever did any blogs that got a lot of attention that you were surprised that they got a lot of attention.
Good question. I have written over 400 articles for Lights, Camera, Crohn's on that site alone. And then I also write for other websites.
Yeah.
So that is a good question. Sometimes I would say it's more so the opposite. So I'll think my mom, who's my angel, we're best friends, and she's been by my side through every single thing that I've ever gone through with my Crohn's. She's my copywriter. So good old Diane Sparacio. She gets my blog and she copy edits it each week for me and looks it over and, says, I think this is going to not go over well, or maybe you should reword this. Cause sometimes I talk a little bit like a sailor, just cause it's the way that I want the attitude to be in the piece. And she'll be like, let's just take that out so it sounds, more credible. And I said, okay, Mom. Well, she always, looks at the article and tells me what she thinks. And she gives me brutal honesty always. And she's always very sweet with it, but it tells me what I need to change or that sort of thing. And sometimes we really think we have a home run. I'll be like, this is one of my best articles. It's going to be amazing. And then social media is such a party pooper sometimes with the algorithm. I'll say why isn't this getting reads? I don't understand. I put so many hours in this. I really thought it was going to help a lot of people, and it's not getting, and she's not even on social media. She'll check my social media and she'll be like, wow, Twitter's pretty quiet about this. And I'm like, okay, Mom, don't remind me, because that can kind of be like a punch to the gut, too, and I think in advocacy, that's one of the biggest struggles is who's listening, who's hearing me. I'm putting so many blood, sweat, and tears in this work for oftentimes no money. And that's what I think is often thought about. And I've received some messages in my DMs that aren't too kind in the past where people are like, oh, it's all glitz and glamour, or you just want to be the center of attention. You want money for this, you want that. And I say, do you know how many hours I put in each week daily, unpaid, to do these things? I don't get paid to, talk about this, talk about that. Yes, I get paid for some things, as I should be. And I try to teach advocates that our stories are worth their weight in gold, and you should not share your story for free. And I think that it's one thing to do a podcast with fellow patients who you want to, collaborate with. That's one thing. But if a pharmaceutical company or a health tech company or anybody comes to you and they're a legit business, they better put their money where their mouth is, because I'm not going to waste my time and energy and my time with my family. This is a job for me too, So yes, I'm going to charge people money if they want me to write an article for their site, So I think that that's something that people kind of get confused about with advocacy is, are we being paid to say certain things? And no, we're not. When I write an article, even when I'm paid, I write that how I want to write it. It just has to say, this is sponsored by this company. So I think that's something to keep in mind when you are taking in information on social media. But I think that's been probably the hardest thing. And I think a lot of advocates struggle with that, is especially when they're starting out. When I started on Instagram, I don't even think I had 200 followers, and it takes so much time to build that audience organically. It's very obvious when advocates are buying followers and they're not legit, and you see somebody's audience grow by the thousands each day. That's not authentic. I'm sorry, so it takes a lot of time and energy. And, when you see your followers dwindle, so maybe you'll gain 10 followers one day and then it goes down 15. It's just a constant, do people not like what I'm saying? Did I say something that didn't resonate with the community? So I think you just have to stop thinking about the followers, the likes, the reads, and keep doing what you're doing. Because even though an article or a post might not get a lot of engagement, there might be somebody in 3 months who needs that subject matter, who will come to me in a DM and say, did you ever do an article on this? I know you've talked about this. And I say, actually, yes. And I have it, but maybe it got 50 likes, on Instagram, and I was depressed about it. When I do a post that's, surprising, and it's like, oh, that got 700 likes. I'm kind of shocked by that. So it's interesting because you never really know. And I always tell advocates too, that Instagram for the IBD community is the bread and butter of what we do. That is where you're going to hit all the patients that are new to this situation, newly diagnosed, caretakers, people that are veteran patients, whereas Twitter is more so the medical community, researchers, fellow advocates who are doing what you're doing. So and Facebook is Facebook. I feel like I've gotten the least engagement on there. It's really, the algorithm makes it so challenging unless you pay for sponsored posts. And I don't pay to sponsor my own articles, on my blog. So I kind of I post there, but I don't really expect anything out of it. I'm just Instagram is really my focus. And I think engaging with your followers and looking at their content too, and sharing it to your stories and engaging on their posts. And then when somebody DMs you, don't just like it or don't just ignore it, actually write them back and make those connections. Because yes, I might be helping people, but you are helping me just as much when I have that camaraderie. I mean, when I was in the emergency room this past week and the amount of messages, this was the first time I had really been in the hospital and I had this army of support, because when I had those bowel obstructions in my surgery, I hadn't come out really on social media yet. So it was just me and my family and friends texting and reaching out. And when you have people that say, look, I had C. diff, did they do this? Did they give you fluids? And people are right there at your fingertips. You feel so much more empowered in that hospital bed, knowing you're not alone.
Yes, I think I saw your post when you were in the emergency room, and it was actually, I was really impressed that you were like, guys, this is, I think, what's going on. What do you know about this? That you were being that vulnerable in that moment and not being the expert in that moment, because so many of your posts really are like, I've done a lot of research on this. I know what I'm talking about here. It was kind of, nice is the wrong word to use for that, but it was refreshing to see that you were being that sort of open and vulnerable and saying, I don't know what's happening here, so I need you back. And so that was really a great way to engage, I think, with your followers and help them feel like experts as well. So it's really lovely. Natalie, I hate to say this, but we've been talking to you for a while. And it's so much fun, but it is unfortunately time for us to ask you our last question, which is, if you had one piece of advice for the IBD community, what would it be?
I would just say, take it one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time. IBD is constantly changing. The pain is fleeting. The beautiful moments are fleeting. The hospital stay is fleeting. It is all a roller coaster. It's an uphill battle. Don't be down on yourself if you're struggling. It's such a difficult disease. It's often debilitating. You're not weak. You're not complaining. It's also rewarding at times when you see that you're feeling great and you're outside pushing a stroller and the sun's shining and you're thinking, wow, I'm such a badass right now. I just beat this flare. I'm outside. I'm walking. I feel strong. And I had this baby. I grew life inside of my body that's been riddled with illness. And look what I was able to create. And when you're a mom, I think that really adds to just feeling strong in those moments, because you might think of your body as, being against it. And I feel that motherhood has really given me a renewed love for myself. So I think that it's just taking a moment to pause each day and reflecting on all that you've encountered, because it's easy for us to brush things under the rug that might seem everyday things, but these are hard, difficult moments that we go through. And even just today, I drove to the GI clinic with my 19-month-old. It's a 40-minute drive there and back. It's pouring rain. I'm trying to find parking. All those little touch points that you think in your head at the time, wow, none of my friends are all perfectly healthy. None of them have to deal with this ever. And you just kind of take a step back, and then you get kind of doomsday a little bit. And then you think, nope, but this is good. I'm through my appointment. I don't have to go back for a few months. So it's this constant inner battle. So I think just be patient and kind to yourself and understand that so many people are doing the same exact thing, thinking the same things as you, dealing with the same struggles, having those setbacks. But I feel like our comebacks are so much stronger. So just focus on the positive as best as you can and realize that there are so many people out there that want to help you. So don't hesitate to reach out on social media. My DMs are always open. I'm always looking for story ideas. I want to feature more people. If you want to be on Lights, Camera, Crones, reach out to me. Don't be shy. And let's do this thing.
That's awesome. Well, and I have a follow-up question for you now, though, because this is fresh in your mind. Do you have any tips for any other parents that have to take their tiny little ones to their appointments, but not so tiny because he's up and walking and moving and not contained? Tips?
It's tough. I've done this for my oldest will be 6 in 3 weeks, and every single appointment and specialist, I pretty much had to bring my children, whether it's an ultrasound. I mean, it's challenging when they're up and moving for sure. I would keep them in a stroller as long as possible. But of course, once they're past 2.5, 3, that's a little challenging. At that age, I didn't have a tablet back then, but we did just this Christmas get my older 2 tablets for road trips up to Chicago to see my family and to the Ozarks where we go to the lake. And they're only for the car or when I have business calls right now. That's my new thing since December. And I think at this stage of the game, if I had to bring my 4-year-old to a major appointment with a GI or something, I would have her bring her tablet. And for that 30 minutes, let her watch a show, bring all the snacks. I mean, my backpack was just filled with snacks today. I actually laughed because if you look at the Instagram post I shared, there are crumbs on the waiting room floor, and I had to tell the nurses, and they said, "We're going to get the brooms, don't worry," because my little guy had literally thrown his snacks like everywhere. Just having any types of distractions, toys, screens, snacks are the best in my opinion. And with the stroller, I was actually pacing around the waiting room and just walking instead of sitting, idle, because there's nothing more embarrassing when your child's like having a tantrum and it's a bunch of people in a GI office and nobody's in the mood to be hearing that. And you're the only one with a child and you're already stressed, how am I going to focus on my appointment when I have a child with me? So I just say distract as much as possible and also understand that your care team's understanding and they're just happy you're being seen and being a compliant patient. So just kind of take a breath. And when it's over, do something to celebrate, do something to treat yourself, because it's a lot to have to bring a child to an appointment. If you can try and get childcare, of course. But for instance, today, my husband had an appointment too, and I didn't have him. I was banking on him watching my son. So I did kind of celebrate today because my next appointment, all 3 of my kids will be in a preschool setting or elementary school. So for the first time ever in 6 years, I made an appointment and I know I'm not going to need childcare. So you will get through that moment. It's just, those first initial 5 to 6 years, depending on how far apart your kids are, it's daunting to walk into an office with a little one.
Natalie, it has been so much fun to talk to you and such a pleasure. Thank you for all you do for the IBD community and for all the great information you put out there. I know we've used it as a resource. And so I definitely want to tell people to go visit your blog for sure, because I think everybody will find something that resonates with them on your blog. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone else for joining us for Bowel Moments. So cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, ladies. Hi, everyone. This is Natalie. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it with your friends.